Hello, I am Jason Castillo, Teacher 1 from Mangono National High School, Division of Rizal, and a PhD reading education student at University of the Philippines, Diliman. And allow me to present to you the topic, an overview of spoken language competence, written by James P. Burns and Barbara Wasik in their book entitled Language and Literacy Development that was published in 2019. So without further ado, allow me to start the presentation. So, the order of business is as follows. So, this talk will be focusing on these four questions. So, the first question is, what does it mean to say that a child has a spoken language competence? So, we're going to determine at the end of this discussion, what does it mean? Or how can we say that a child has a spoken language competence? The second one is, as teachers, why should we care whether our children or whether these children acquire spoken language competence? Why should we care? Can the spoken language competence affect the teaching and learning process inside the classroom? Later on, we're going to deal with that. Next is, how does language competence change over time? And what are the factors that promote these changes? So we all know that language, as time goes by, is evolving, it is changing, but the question there is, how does language competence change over time? And what are the different factors that affect these changes? And the last one is the problems that we might encounter with this particular topic. So let's start. So the first question deals with, what does it mean when that to say that a child has a spoken language competence? How can we say that a child is competent when it comes to the spoken language? So the common knowledge is the child has a spoken language competence if the child possesses these three knowledges. The first one is semantic knowledge, or the child knows the meaning of a number of words. So the child doesn't know only the words, but he knows the meaning of the words associated with this one. Another thing is phonological knowledge. The child can pronounce these words correctly. Of course, when we say correctly, we are referring to a particular culture. Okay, for example, in the English language, we cannot say that this pronunciation is right and this pronunciation is wrong as long as there is a culture that is accepting this pronunciation. And the third one, of course, is grammatical knowledge. So the child knows how to put the right endings on these words and arranges it into proper sequences. So if the child possesses these three, now, the common knowledge is the child has a spoken language competence. However, this paper of Burns and Wasik emphasizes that spoken language competence is not only exclusive for these knowledges. A child has also a spoken language competence if the child possesses these characteristics. So the first one is a desire to communicate with others, because what's the sense of knowing these knowledges, knowing semantic, phonological, and grammatical knowledge, if he will not, or if the child will not communicate with others? And in relation to communication, of course, the child must also respect others. The child must respect the opinion of others. Okay. The third one is he has a desire rather, how to get along with others. Next one is reciprocity or turn taking, because a child has a spoken language competence when he knows when is the right time to speak. And aside from that, when is the right time to listen, because listening is one way of respecting others, which was tackled on the second bullet. And the last one is lack of egocentrism, or the child is not only thinking about himself, but he also thinks on the opinion of others. So it means to say that a child has a spoken language competence if he knows how to socialize with others. This paper mentioned that a child has spoken language competence if he knows how to have social competence as well. So these are the things that was mentioned on the paper of Burns and Wasik on how are we going to determine if the child has this spoken language competence. Moving on to the next question, why should we care? As teachers, why should we care whether a child acquire social or acquire spoken language competence? In Filipino expression, ano bang pake ko bilang isang guro? Anong pake ko kung maka-acquire siya or kung competent siya when it comes to spoken language competence? So uh, the paper also answers that the children who enter school with high levels of phonological, semantic, and grammatical knowledge learn to read better than children who enter school with lower levels of these forms of knowledge. So imagine if the child has a high level of spoken language, or if a child is has spoken language competence inside our classroom, they will be able to learn how to read better than those who has a low spoken language competence. And we all know that in the academic setup, first, you learn how to read, and second is you read for you to learn. So if the child is not competent when it comes to the spoken language, it will be very difficult for the student to learn our lessons. Okay. Next is most narrative text and plays contain dialogue. Of course, when we are speaking about dialogue, we are also referring to the ability of the child to speak. Okay. And of course, the child's ability to form positive relationships in schools and adapt to the demands of the classroom. Of course, if our student is not speaking, if our student doesn't have this competence when it comes to spoken language, it will be very difficult for that particular student to communicate with others. It will be very difficult for that student to collaborate, which is one of the major approaches in the teaching of 21st century learners, collaboration. How can this student collaborate with other students if he doesn't have the spoken language competence? So the the paper also show this diagram that, just like what I've mentioned a while ago, a child has a spoken language competence if he also possesses social competence. And this social competence has a relation to conversational skills. Of course, um, we remember we cannot socialize with others without talking to one another. Of course, if we can still remember the first time that we've met our friends today, it started with a simple hi and hello. But of course, if the child will not be able to say that, how can he have a a friend? Okay, so it will start from the conversational skills. Also, social competence has something to do as well with the ability to produce and comprehend implicit meaning. Okay? And the last one is the use of humor. So the um these are social competence, and these three has a relationship with one another. Of course, social competence can create positive social relations, and if the child feels that he has a positive social relation, the child will be engaged in different classroom tasks. So it always starts in speaking. It always starts in a good competence when it comes to the spoken language. Okay? So the next is, how does language competence change over time? And what are the factors that promote these changes? So, in the paper, uh, the aspects of spoken language were divided into four. So the paper mentioned four aspects of the spoken language, and the change was also saw there, and the factors as well. Okay, so let's start. The first aspect is the phonological, semantic, and grammatical knowledge. So how does it change over time? So according to the paper, children incrementally add to and refine their phonological knowledge and grammatical knowledge between birth and age 5 or 6. So that is um the beginning of the change at the age of 5 and 6. Another thing is there are little changes in number one, recognizing or produce sound patterns in their native language. Another thing is add appropriate endings to words and arrange words in proper grammatical order. So again, it will start at the age of 5. And another thing is developmental increases occur both before and after age of 5 in terms of, or in the case of vocabulary. Okay, so what are the factors to these changes? Okay, so the first is children need to have multiple opportunities to speak and to be spoken to in order for there to be growth in their phonological, semantic, and grammatical knowledge. That's very true. Because how can a student learn if he will not be able to listen first and at the same time be given a chance to speak? Okay, so it is very important that we communicate to our child, not only on the matter of um, telling them something, but also giving them the freedom to express themselves, giving them the freedom to speak. Because in that way, you are actually practicing developing their spoken language competence. Another thing is, according to this paper, children need to know at least 400 words before they begin to demonstrate early grammatical insight. So at least 400 words according to this theory before they can develop this grammatical knowledge that is being mentioned. Okay, so that is the first aspect, phonological, semantic, and grammatical knowledge. So let's move forward to the second aspect, which is conversational skill. Um how conversational skill change over time, and what are the factors of these changes. So the first one is young children interrupt and talk out of turn more often than older children and adults. Okay, so of course it is noticeable that there is a time wherein our children are talks too much, and talks blah 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 blah. It is an endless talk. Okay. Next one is preschoolers are also more likely to incorrectly assume knowledge on the part of their listeners than older children. So these preschoolers assume that um adults or anyone that they are conversing with knows their background. For example, this preschooler talking to an adult assumes that this adult knows all his friends, for example, and the daily experience in their life. Okay, if we can still remember our children, they are um after they go to school, they are making stories like, oh, you know what, my teacher whose name is ganito, whose name is ganyan, and my friend whose name is ganito, and blah blah blah, and so on and so forth, and they are assuming that we know who are these people, who are they talking about. Next one is children continue to improve their conversational skills after the preschool period and after the first few years of elementary school. So I think one of the factors why um why there is a separation anxiety during the first day of the class is because they are not yet confident talking and conversing with their students. But of course, according to this theory, according to this paper, that it can still improve. Okay, so what are the factors why these changes? So the paper mentioned that it is not yet, not clearly at this point, it is not yet clear why these change happens. Because according to the paper, conversations are culturally defined. Okay, and with that, parents and other adults are skilled at supporting conversations through their patience and questions that provide scaffolds for children. Okay, so there is a time in the life of our children that they are asking questions endlessly. Okay? Just like, bakit? Parang the whys are not ending. And as adults, we have to be more patient. We have to answer these because it is their curiosity. We need to feed their curiosity. And in that way, we will be able to help them as well to develop their spoken language competence. Aside, it's like hitting two birds with one shot, wherein you are already developing the spoken language competence. At the same time, you are making them think critically. So it is the parents and the adults' duty because the peers, their friends, cannot do it for them. So as adults, we have to be more patient in answering every question. Okay? And do not be tired in answering the questions of of our children. Okay? So we're done with conversational skill. Let's have communicative goals. Okay? On how they communicate. Okay, even pre-verbal children seem to have a wide array intentions try to express through gestures and action. Okay, so the child, even though he is not yet speaking, knows how to communicate with others by the use of gesture. For instance, a baby, we can know if the baby is already hungry if the baby cries. Okay, we know if the baby is feeling uncomfortable if he cries. So the cry of the baby has something to do with what he wants us or what message that the baby wants us to know about him. Okay? And another thing is the smile of the baby. Even though he's not yet speaking, the baby is not yet speaking, but still we can understand them. That is their way of communicating with us. Now, by the age of 5, according to this paper, children often have enough control over conventional syntactic constructions that they can express a wide range of declaratives, imperatives, interrogatives, and so on. So that is the beginning. Age of 5 is the beginning on how can they construct these expressions. Okay. Next, what are the factors that affects these changes? What are the factors that affects these changes? First one is just like the conversational skills, little is known about why these changes takes place. Okay, unfortunately, children discover that they are often misunderstood or fail to get what they want when they use imperfect or ambiguous construction. Okay. And another thing is developmental sequence of infants. So what are the developmental sequence of infants? First, infants and mothers shared attention to the same object. After they share, the infant started to follow the attentional gaze of their mother. Then finally, infants began to direct the attention of their mothers. So that is the developmental sequence of infants according to Carpenter, Nagel, and Tomasello in 1990. Okay. So last one, we have comprehension, the use of communicative devices. So how does our children comprehend when it comes to the spoken language competence? So the first one is children below age 5 have easier time understanding direct rather than indirect requests. Okay, so it is suggested by this paper that when we communicate to our children, to children below the age of 5, we must use direct requests, direct instructions rather than indirect. So instead of saying, oh, I'm hungry, we can say, let's go, let's eat. Okay. Next, 5 and 6 years old show less understanding in ironic and sarcastic comments than older children and adults, because we all know that these children ages 5 to 6 doesn't know sarcasm yet. Okay. Children older than 8 seem to get the point of verbal jokes and witty statements more readily than children below the age of 8. So when you make jokes, when you crack jokes, it is suggested by this theory that you crack it on a children 8 years old and above. Okay, so next, the key aspect of children's mastery to these communicative devices is their ability to comprehend and control utterances that are figurative or intentionally false. And when we say false, false statements may be expressed through the following. It may be expressed to conveying negative attitude in a muted way. Okay? Silent treatment. Make someone laugh, spare someone's feeling, and avoiding punishment. Now, what are the factors that affect these changes when it comes to comprehension? Factors are the following. First, children may start out with a default assumption that there is only one way to express a communicative goal, and that people are nearly always truthful, literal, and referential. Okay, so there is this assumption. But of course, as they grow older, they will realize that there is not only one way, there's no only one way to express communicative goals. Okay, there are messages that are indirect in in a way. Okay, next, children younger than 6 are rarely confronted with examples of non-literal utterances. And with this paper, Burns and Wasik also cited the phases on how to acquire skills by Anderson in 1990. So the first phase is the person makes a lot of mistake. So it's okay. There is always a room for mistakes and needs to pay close attention to what he or she is doing. So in the first phase, it's just okay. It's okay to commit mistakes because by committing mistakes, you will be able to learn. Okay? You will be able to, that's the first step in acquiring skills, as according to Anderson in 1990. The second phase is the person shows considerably mastery of the technique. Of course, when you commit mistake, you will keep on practicing. And somehow, little by little, you will be able to have mastery. But it is somewhat deeply immersed in the behavior itself. And the third one, the third phase, the person not only shows high level of mastery, he or she is also able to step back and think about his or her performance at a metacognitive level. Okay, so those are these phases. So first, commit mistake, then little by little practicing. Then after practicing, you will be able to master, to acquire these skills, and you will be able to um, think of it. Okay. So what are the problems encountered? So according to the paper, there are actually two populations of individuals who could shed light on the importance of spoken language competence. So the first one are the individuals who are simply delayed in the expression of spoken language skills because they failed to have adequate input or practice. So these are the people who were not exposed in in conversations. That's why they failed to have an adequate input on this one. Okay, and the second one is, of course, the people who have neurological problems. Okay, so that is also a big factor that limit or undermine the efficiency of short-term interventions, simple exposure, or routine practice. So who are these people? Children and adults who have autism. They have they are having they are having difficulty when it comes to the spoken language competence. Adults who have sustained right hemisphere damage through stroke, and adults who have sustained damage in their frontal lobes through traumatic brain injury. So these are some people, okay, who are, let's say, having problem, who will be having a problem when it comes to the spoken language, when it comes to developing the spoken language competence. But of course, we are not um, we are not closing the doors for them. There's still a chance for them. Okay, so what are the problems that, according to Martin and McDonald in 2003, overly literal language comprehension. So that's one of the problems. Difficulty in comprehending narrative humor, because they might think that humorous narratives can be literal. Okay, injection of socially inappropriate, disinhibited, or tangential comments during conversations, and over talkativeness. Okay, poor verbal fluency. I remember I have this student who is having difficulty in speaking, but I don't want to. Don't want to. What do you call this? I don't want to give my own um diagnosis, because he's not diagnosed. Okay, he was not labeled by experts. Um, Other teachers think that he cannot read. Why? Because he cannot speak. Okay, but in my observation, this child can actually read in his mind. He can understand the text. However, he is just having a difficulty when it comes to speaking. That's why during the reading assessments, this students always got failed, because of course he cannot transcribe it through speaking. The text, he cannot transcribe it through speaking. But on my personal observation, I might be wrong. On my personal observation, this student can actually read. However, he cannot just transcribe it, just like what I've mentioned, in speaking. Okay. Next is impairment in prosody and difficulty reading emotion in facial expressions. These are the problems that might encounter by these two populations that were mentioned a while ago. So in a nutshell, the ability or the spoken language competence is really much important. And it's something that we cannot neglect, because this is the beginning. This is the beginning of a more complex problems if the child is not competent. Of course, as we've mentioned a while ago, if the child is less competent when it comes to spoken language, she will not be able to read. And if the student cannot be able to read, it will be very difficult for that student to learn. Another thing is, the if the child has a low spoken language competence, it will be very difficult for him to communicate with others. And if um if there will be no communication with others, there is a possibility that these students will also have a low social competence, okay, which will lead that student to being alone. Okay, so that's why um, spoken language competence is very much important. So, with that, thank you very much and have a great day ahead. Thank you.